This video explores the troubling accounts that emerged after Tanzania's most recent and highly disputed election. Stories that point to disturbing police behavior during the post-election unrest. While authorities maintained that they were restoring order, many citizens claimed they experienced something very different. Intimidation, excessive force, late-night raids, and violent confrontations that left entire communities living in fear. Today, we take a closer look at those allegations, the eyewitness testimonies, and the atmosphere of fear that spread through the country during this tense period. In the days following Tanzania's most recent and highly disputed election, the atmosphere across the country shifted from tense anticipation to a deep, unsettling fear. Many citizens who had lined up for hours to cast their votes felt blindsided when the final results were announced, claiming that the outcome did not match what they had witnessed at their own polling stations. As frustration spread, small groups of residents began gathering in streets, markets, and neighborhood corners, not in violent mobs, but in confused clusters of people trying to understand what had gone wrong. At first, these gatherings were largely peaceful. People spoke in low voices, exchanged updates, and shared video clips circulating across WhatsApp and Facebook. But as the crowds grew, the presence of heavily armed police units also intensified. What many expected would be a routine display of law enforcement quickly escalated into scenes that witnesses later described as frighteningly aggressive. Residents recall the first warning signs: police trucks rolling slowly through town centers, officers dressed in full riot gear stepping out with shields and batons, and loudspeakers ordering everyone to disperse immediately. Even those who were not part of the gatherings, shop owners, commuters, children returning from school, found themselves caught up in the sudden waves of tension. As eyewitnesses claim, it didn't take long before the situation spiraled. Tear gas canisters were reportedly fired into crowds with little warning, sending people scrambling for safety. Parents lifted their children and ran. Shopkeepers pulled down metal shutters and hid inside. Clouds of gas drifted into homes, schools, and small businesses, leaving entire neighborhoods coughing, crying, and terrified. Several residents reported seeing officers chase down individuals who tried to flee, beating some with batons or dragging them toward police trucks. Others described officers knocking on doors late at night, searching for people suspected of organizing unrest, even when families insisted they had been inside their homes the entire time. Stories spread of people being arrested without explanation, sometimes disappearing for days before relatives learned where they were being held. Medical workers from various hospitals later spoke anonymously about the sudden influx of injured civilians. Some arrived with swollen limbs, deep bruises, or wounds that looked like the result of rubber bullets or blunt force trauma. Many of them whispered that the injuries came from encounters with police, but out of fear, they begged doctors not to document the details officially. Across towns and cities, life changed almost overnight. Family routines were disrupted. Businesses closed early. Public transport drivers avoided routes where clashes were likely. Even simple errands, like visiting a market or going to work, became moments of anxiety because no one could predict when or where the next confrontation would erupt. This period marked the beginning of a wave of fear that swept through countless households. People locked themselves indoors, glued to radios and phones for updates. The sound of sirens, shouting, and sporadic gunshots became an unsettling background noise in areas that had been peaceful just days earlier. What had started as disappointment over election results transformed into something much darker as the alleged actions of security forces left many Tanzanians feeling unprotected, unheard, and afraid. These early days set the tone for what witnesses would later call one of the most distressing episodes in the country's recent history. In the days that followed, the situation grew even more chaotic as more stories emerged from different regions of the country. What had initially seemed like isolated confrontations soon appeared, through countless eyewitness accounts, to be a widespread pattern of aggressive policing. People who had never participated in demonstrations found themselves entangled in scenes they had only seen on television. Streets suddenly filling with riot police, civilians running in every direction, and the sharp echo of tear gas canisters exploding against the ground. In coastal communities, residents described how entire neighborhoods were sealed off without warning. Police trucks blocked the entrances, and officers marched through the narrow streets, ordering everyone to remain indoors. Young men were pulled aside for questioning, sometimes forced to lie face down on dusty roads as officers searched them for illegal items or evidence of political involvement. Many who later recounted these encounters said they had been threatened or intimidated even when they insisted they were not part of any protest. Further inland, traders at busy marketplaces experienced some of the most startling confrontations. According to vendors, officers stormed through the trading stalls in an attempt to break up conversations they suspected were politically charged. Some people recalled seeing officers overturn tables of produce, confiscate mobile phones, and detain individuals who attempted to record what was happening. Mothers holding babies were seen crying as they hurriedly packed their goods, trying to escape the chaos that erupted in minutes. Transport hubs became another flashpoint. At bus terminals, drivers said officers interrogated groups of passengers, asking them where they were traveling and why. Some buses were ordered to unload everyone so that officers could search the luggage compartments for posters, political materials, or anything that could suggest involvement in post-election discussions. Several passengers later shared that they had no intention of joining any demonstration. They were simply trying to visit relatives or return home after work. Yet they, too, became caught in the wave of suspicion that swept across the country. What frightened many citizens the most was the unpredictability. There was no clear pattern to when or where police appeared. A quiet neighborhood could suddenly teem with officers within minutes. A peaceful walk to buy food could turn into a desperate sprint away from choking clouds of tear gas. Families who once enjoyed sitting outside their homes in the evening now locked their doors before sunset, unsure of what might unfold after dark. Rumors circulated rapidly, carried through whispered conversations and forwarded voice notes. People shared warnings to avoid certain streets, certain markets, or certain bus routes. Others spoke of nighttime knocks on doors, loud, forceful, and terrifying. Families would hold their breath in total silence, hoping the officers would pass without breaking in. Some residents reported hearing shouts and cries from nearby homes as neighbors were taken away. Days would pass without any information about where those individuals had been taken or when they might return. The psychological toll deepened with each incident. Parents began teaching their children how to react if they heard gunshots or if officers entered their homes. Shop owners kept emergency bags ready in case they had to flee quickly. People who once felt confident and secure in their communities now lived with a constant, heavy sense of dread, unsure of how long the unrest would continue or how much worse it might get. This period revealed not only the intensity of the conflict but also the vulnerability of ordinary citizens caught between political tension and the force of state power. Their lives, routines, work, families, and sense of safety were being reshaped by fear. And as more stories surfaced, the question that lingered in the minds of many was simple. How far would this go, and who would protect the people if those expected to keep the peace were the very ones causing the fear? As the days stretched on, the stories circulating across towns and villages grew increasingly disturbing, painting a picture of police conduct that many citizens described as excessive, unpredictable, and deeply frightening. What alarmed people most was not only the use of force in active demonstrations, but the growing number of reports describing confrontations taking place far away from protest hotspots. Inside homes, shops, workplaces, and quiet residential streets that had seen no signs of political activity at all. Witnesses claimed that certain police patrols began operating in a manner that felt less like crowd control and more like tactical intimidation. Several families recounted nights when loud banging on their doors jolted them awake, only to find officers demanding to search their houses for suspected agitators. Most families said they had no idea who these alleged agitators were, nor why their homes had been targeted. But the fear was enough to force many into silence. Parents described gathering their children in back rooms, whispering reassurances while officers moved through their houses with harsh voices and heavy boots. Shop owners told another side of the story. Many of them said officers would storm into their stores without warning, interrogating them about customers they had served earlier in the day, or accusing them of harboring protest organizers. A few business owners reported that their goods were damaged during these sudden inspections. Others said they were slapped, pushed, or threatened when they hesitated to answer fast enough. With each passing day, more shops began closing early, not because of protests, but because the presence of security forces had become unpredictable and frightening. On the streets, young men seemed to be the most frequent targets. Residents said officers frequently stopped groups of youths even when they were simply walking to work or returning home from casual activities. Some were ordered to sit on the ground while their pockets were emptied. Others said they were beaten for talking back, even when they insisted they were only trying to explain themselves. Rumors spread of vans that would pull up suddenly, grab 2 or 3 people and drive off, leaving families scrambling to figure out which police station their loved ones had been taken to. Hospitals continued to feel the ripple effects. Medical workers described late-night rushes of injured civilians brought in by neighbors or relatives. The injuries varied: swollen arms, fractured ribs, cuts that looked like they came from blunt objects, and deep bruises that ran across people's backs or shoulders. Many patients were reluctant to give details, offering only vague explanations like, "I fell," or "I ran into something." But the patterns were too similar, too consistent, for doctors to dismiss. Anonymous staff members quietly shared that several patients had whispered about being beaten during arrests or while held in custody. In some neighborhoods, the sound of police sirens became a signal for people to immediately shut windows, turn off lights, and remain silent until the noise faded. Communities that once prided themselves on staying united began to fracture under the weight of fear. People no longer trusted their neighbors enough to speak openly, afraid someone might report them for saying the wrong thing. This created an atmosphere of isolation, where even those who had nothing to do with the demonstrations felt the chilling effects of the crackdown. Local leaders, religious figures, and community elders tried to mediate, encouraging calm and urging residents not to confront officers. But even they admitted they felt helpless, as the situation seemed to exceed anything they had witnessed before. Some elders claimed that their attempts to intervene only resulted in them being threatened or ignored. Through all these claims and testimonies, one theme echoed louder than the rest: the sense that the police response had gone far beyond simply restoring order. Many Tanzanians said they felt the force used was meant to punish, silence, and intimidate rather than protect the public. And as more of these alleged encounters came to light, the outrage grew, not only among those directly affected, but across communities who watched their once calm and familiar environment turn into a place of fear. In the days that followed, the pattern of police behavior grew more predictable and more alarming. What had begun as scattered confrontations slowly turned into a systematic pattern of harsh enforcement across multiple regions. Many residents described how police patrols became more aggressive, moving in organized groups, kicking down doors, and confronting people before even asking questions. These patrols operated late into the night, often without identifying themselves or presenting warrants, creating an atmosphere where no one felt safe. Families stayed awake long after midnight, listening for the sound of boots on gravel or the rumble of engines approaching their homes. One of the most disturbing allegations that circulated widely came from individuals who said they were detained during these operations. They claimed that once inside police custody, the treatment worsened. Some described being slapped, kicked, or beaten with batons while officers demanded they confess to organizing or participating in protests. Others reported being kept in overcrowded holding rooms with no access to water, food, or medical attention. Those with injuries said they were denied treatment unless officers believed they were close to losing consciousness. A few detainees later recounted how officers mocked them, telling them that no one outside the station cared enough to come looking. Meanwhile, as unrest continued, the police appeared to adopt an approach that targeted entire communities rather than specific suspects. Residents spoke of officers blocking roads, raiding markets, and shutting down small businesses without explanation. Street vendors, boda riders, and young people hanging outside their homes found themselves treated as potential criminals. Even those who tried to film what was happening reported having their phones confiscated or smashed on the ground. In many neighborhoods, the message from police was clear: no voices allowed, no complaints tolerated, no resistance forgiven. There were also accounts of police using live ammunition in areas where demonstrators were unarmed. Witnesses described hearing sharp cracks echoing through narrow streets, followed by screams and frantic running. People later claimed that officers justified these shots by saying they were firing in the air to disperse crowds. But residents argued that the bullets came dangerously close to homes, vehicles, and even children playing outside. Some families said bullet holes remained in their walls long after the tension had passed, a chilling reminder of how close tragedy had come. The brutality extended beyond the physical. People described psychological intimidation designed to break the spirit of entire communities. Officers reportedly threatened to arrest anyone who questioned them or even attempted to ask why they were being targeted. Some residents said they were told that if they continued speaking out, their families would face the same consequences. Mothers feared sending their children to school. Young men avoided walking alone, worried that they might be picked up and accused of crimes they had nothing to do with. The silence that followed these incidents was perhaps the most telling. Many victims were afraid to report what had happened to them. Local leaders hesitated to speak publicly, worried they too could be targeted. Human rights groups struggled to gather verified testimonies because residents felt sharing their stories would put their lives, and the lives of their families, at risk. The fear was so deep that even weeks after the violence had subsided, entire neighborhoods felt muted. Conversations happened in hushed tones, behind closed doors, with constant glances toward windows and doorways. This period revealed not only the physical brutality of law enforcement but also the psychological trauma inflicted on communities. As these stories spread through whispers, leaked videos, and quiet testimonies, one thing became clear. The wounds left behind by the police response were far more than temporary bruises. They were the kind of wounds that reshape how people view authority, safety, and their own country. As the days stretched on, a different layer of the crisis began to surface. Stories from inside police detention centers. These accounts did not come easily. Many of those who had been taken in by officers were reluctant to speak, frightened that sharing their experiences might attract repercussions. Some whispered their stories to trusted neighbors, while others confided in family members only after being pressed for answers about their injuries or sudden fearfulness. Eventually, scattered fragments of these testimonies began to piece together a disturbing picture of what detainees claimed they endured behind closed doors. Several individuals reported that upon arrest, they were not told why they were being detained. They described being transported in overcrowded trucks, their hands tied or held behind their backs, with officers shouting orders and occasionally striking anyone who protested or asked questions. Once inside the stations, the treatment allegedly worsened. According to these accounts, detainees were ordered to sit on cold concrete floors in cramped rooms where dozens were kept without proper ventilation or access to clean water. Some said they were denied food for long hours, while others claimed they were beaten if they asked to use the restroom. A few detainees described interrogation sessions where officers accused them of planning violence or inciting unrest. Accusations they insisted were false. Some claimed they were slapped or hit with batons when they denied involvement. One young man recounted how he was forced to kneel for hours, his legs shaking, until he collapsed from exhaustion. A woman who had been arrested while returning from work said officers mocked her and threatened to charge her with participating in illegal demonstrations, even though she insisted she had not been involved. Families searching for missing relatives also faced their own trauma. Parents, siblings, and spouses lined up outside police stations, begging for information. Some said officers gave vague answers or refused to acknowledge whether the person was inside. Others claimed they were asked for money just to be told where their loved one might be held. The uncertainty tore through communities, creating waves of panic as people feared that those taken might not return home safely. Lawyers who attempted to intervene also expressed frustration. They described being denied access to clients or being told that paperwork did not yet exist to process any legal procedures. Human rights advocates explained privately that they were overwhelmed by the volume of complaints they were receiving and struggled to document every case properly because so many people were too afraid to speak publicly. Amid all this, whispers spread about temporary holding areas set up in locations not typically used for detentions. People living near these spots described hearing cries at night, loud bangs, and the sounds of vehicles arriving long after curfew hours. Though these reports were difficult to verify, they added to the sense of fear and uncertainty gripping the nation. What many found especially troubling was the psychological toll these events left behind. Men who once spoke confidently now avoided eye contact. Women who had been outspoken in their communities became withdrawn. Teenagers who witnessed their parents being taken away struggled to sleep, waking suddenly at the slightest noise outside. Even those who were never detained felt the weight of fear, sensing that anyone could be targeted without warning. It was during this period that a larger question emerged across Tanzania. Were these actions a temporary response to unrest, or were they signs of a deeper problem within the policing system during politically charged moments? For many citizens, the distinction no longer mattered. The damage had already been done. Communities had been shaken, trust in law enforcement had fractured, and countless families were left carrying invisible scars from a period they wished they could forget. In the weeks that followed, something deeper began to take shape beneath the surface of the chaos. People weren't just afraid of the confrontations happening in the streets anymore. Many were now terrified of what was happening behind closed doors. Allegations started emerging from those who had been taken into police custody, and their stories painted a disturbing picture of what some claimed was happening inside certain detention centers during the height of the unrest. According to these accounts, the brutality did not end on the streets. Several individuals who were released after days in custody spoke about being held in overcrowded rooms, where fear hung as thick as the air itself. Many said they were never given a clear explanation for their arrest. Some claimed they were denied access to family members or legal assistance, left to endure long nights listening to the sounds of others being interrogated or beaten. One young man described the echoing cries that would travel through the hallways, brief, muffled, then suddenly cut short, as if someone had forced silence upon them. Others recounted how officers used intimidation as a tool of control. They spoke of aggressive questioning, threats meant to break down their resolve, and tactics designed to make them confess to organizing protests or spreading information online, whether true or not. A few individuals alleged that they were slapped, kicked, or beaten with batons while their hands were tied. Some described being forced to kneel on hard floors for hours as punishment for refusing to answer certain questions. Even those who avoided physical harm said the psychological pressure was unbearable, leaving them traumatized long after their release. Families searching for their missing relatives encountered another form of brutality, not physical but emotional. Many said they went from one station to another, begging for information, only to be turned away or told nothing. Mothers spoke of being mocked or ignored when they pleaded for updates. Brothers and sisters described the frustration of being told, "We have no one by that name here," only to discover days later that their loved one had been held there the entire time. These experiences left deep emotional scars, adding to the already heavy burden placed on families during the unrest. Community leaders and human rights advocates tried to raise alarm about what was happening. They attempted to file complaints, document injuries, and reach out to legal organizations, but many said the fear of retaliation silenced their efforts. Some activists claimed they were being followed or monitored, while others went quiet after receiving warnings. The environment became one where even seeking justice or accountability felt dangerous. And yet, despite the intimidation, people continued to speak out in whatever small ways they could. Some recorded audio messages describing their experiences. Others quietly shared photos of their injuries. A few brave individuals stood before cameras to tell the world what they believed had happened to them. These stories spread through social media at a rapid pace, amplifying the voices of those who felt unheard and revealing a darker layer of the post-election crisis. By this point, what had started as frustration over election results had evolved into a deeper fear of the very institutions meant to protect the public. The police, traditionally viewed as guardians of order, were now being accused by many civilians of becoming instruments of intimidation and violence. Trust between the community and law enforcement was eroding fast, replaced by suspicion, resentment, and a growing sense of betrayal. This rising tension reached every corner of society. Parents worried not just about their children being caught in street clashes, but also about them simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time and ending up in custody. Young people felt targeted, especially those who had spoken out online. Even elders who rarely involved themselves in politics whispered their concerns, fearing the country was heading down a path that would take years to recover from. This chapter of the story reveals not just conflict in the streets, but a deeper crisis, one that seeped into homes, families, and the psychological well-being of an entire nation. The allegations of police brutality weren't just about physical violence. They reflected a broken relationship between citizens and the forces sworn to protect them, leaving wounds that would not heal quickly. Even weeks after the immediate unrest had subsided, the emotional and social impact of the alleged police actions continued to ripple through communities. Residents described a lingering atmosphere of fear and mistrust toward law enforcement. In neighborhoods that had witnessed confrontations, families spoke of sleepless nights, cautious movements, and an ongoing reluctance to speak openly about political matters. The presence of security forces, though less aggressive than during the height of the unrest, remained conspicuous, with patrols and checkpoints visible in many urban areas. This constant visibility served as a reminder of the state's authority and the potential consequences of dissent. Testimonies collected from residents suggested that interactions with police, even in everyday contexts, had become tense. People recounted routine stops at checkpoints where officers demanded identification and questioned travelers without clear explanation. Drivers and pedestrians described feeling as if they were under scrutiny simply for moving about their daily lives. These encounters, though sometimes brief, reinforced a pervasive sense of intimidation and contributed to the overall tension in communities. Several eyewitnesses also reported that the fear instilled by police tactics extended beyond those directly involved in demonstrations. Shops and businesses were cautious about opening late or hosting gatherings, and public spaces that once encouraged social interaction became quieter and more guarded. Children were instructed to avoid playing in streets, and adults hesitated to leave their homes after dark. The cumulative effect of these experiences left residents anxious and wary, with some expressing distrust toward the authorities for months after the unrest. The role of police during this period, as described in multiple accounts, extended beyond crowd control. Witnesses reported that officers sometimes targeted individuals who were not participating in protests, raising questions about the proportionality of force used. Rumors circulated about arbitrary arrests and intimidation of those suspected of dissent, creating an environment where people were afraid to speak freely or engage in normal civic activities. Though these reports varied in detail, the consistent theme was one of heavy-handed tactics, perceived as punitive rather than protective, leaving a lasting impression on communities across Tanzania. International media coverage and commentary on these events highlighted concerns over law enforcement's response to political unrest. While not all sources were able to independently verify each account, the volume of eyewitness testimonies and reports suggested a pattern of behavior that drew attention from human rights observers and advocacy groups. Discussions emphasized the importance of accountability, transparency, and the need for measures to restore trust between law enforcement and the public. For viewers, understanding these experiences provides insight into how police conduct during periods of unrest can shape not only immediate safety, but also long-term societal trust. The accounts paint a picture of a community navigating the aftermath of forceful interventions, where fear lingers and the process of recovery remains fragile. Even as the immediate unrest subsided, the memory of police actions continued to weigh heavily on communities across Tanzania. Residents recounted specific incidents where officers allegedly used excessive force against civilians. In several towns, witnesses described individuals being chased through narrow streets, beaten with batons, or forcibly detained without explanation. Children and elderly citizens were not spared from the chaos. Reports suggested that families often had to shield vulnerable members as security forces moved through neighborhoods, attempting to disperse gatherings or enforce curfews. In urban centers, eyewitnesses described moments when public squares, marketplaces, and transit hubs became scenes of tension. Ordinary commuters, people going to work, shopping, or simply moving between neighborhoods, found themselves caught in confrontations. Tear gas, once used to disperse demonstrators, reportedly spread into homes and small businesses, forcing people to evacuate and creating panic in areas far from any protest. Residents recalled that even brief encounters with armed officers left lasting psychological scars, fostering distrust and fear that extended well beyond the streets where unrest had occurred. Hospitals and clinics quietly received numerous patients with injuries consistent with crowd control measures. Medical staff, who often treated patients in anonymity due to fear of reprisal, spoke of bruises, lacerations, and other wounds that were allegedly inflicted during police operations. For many of these victims, the trauma was compounded by a lack of clarity about why they were targeted. Families expressed confusion, frustration, and anger at the seeming arbitrariness of arrests or physical confrontations, highlighting the emotional as well as physical toll of the events. The social fabric of affected communities also changed. People reported limiting travel within their own neighborhoods, avoiding public gatherings, and refraining from discussing political matters in public. Business operations were disrupted. Shops closed early, markets operated with reduced staff, and public transport schedules were altered due to fear of confrontations. The cumulative effect was a shift in the daily rhythm of life, where caution and avoidance became essential strategies for survival. These experiences underscored the broader impact of police behavior during the post-election unrest. Beyond the immediate injuries or detentions, the alleged actions of law enforcement fostered a climate of uncertainty and fear. Residents described a lingering sense of vulnerability, emphasizing that the consequences of such encounters were not limited to the streets or public squares, but extended into homes, workplaces, and the everyday choices people made about movement and safety. By listening to these accounts, viewers gain a deeper understanding of how law enforcement conduct during periods of political tension can ripple through communities, shaping not just short-term events but also long-term perceptions of authority, safety, and justice. The stories highlight the importance of transparency, accountability, and the need for mechanisms to rebuild trust between police and the communities they serve. The post-election period in Tanzania left an indelible mark on the relationship between civilians and law enforcement. Eyewitness accounts and testimonies describe a period of fear, confusion, and distrust, with residents recounting alleged instances of excessive force, arbitrary arrests, and aggressive dispersal of gatherings. Even weeks after the unrest, the psychological and social effects remain evident, shaping the daily lives of countless citizens. The alleged actions of police during this period not only caused immediate physical harm but also contributed to a broader climate of intimidation. Families reported sleepless nights, children were kept indoors, and neighborhoods that once thrived with activity became quiet and guarded. Hospitals quietly treated victims with injuries they described as stemming from encounters with law enforcement, and communities spoke of lasting fear and uncertainty. These accounts underscore the serious consequences of heavy-handed policing, highlighting the need for accountability and trust-building in any society recovering from unrest. Understanding these events is crucial for appreciating how law enforcement behavior can affect both the safety and social fabric of a nation. The stories collected from residents, medical personnel, and eyewitnesses provide a human perspective on the challenges faced during the post-election period, reminding viewers that the impact of such events extends far beyond the streets where confrontations occurred. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this investigation into police behavior during Tanzania's post-election unrest insightful, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us bring more in-depth stories and investigations directly to you. Stay informed, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next video.